Admiral Kethfer stood in the war room on Nexus Prime, staring at the massive holographic display that showed the current state of the galaxy. Red zones spread across the map like a deadly infection, each one marking a star system that had fallen. To the Vorthic swarm, the sight made his stomach turn with fear and anger. 3 years ago, the first reports had come in from the Outer Rim territories. Strange biomechanical ships had appeared from beyond the galaxy's edge, attacking mining colonies and research stations. At first, the Galactic Defense Coalition had not been worried. They had the most advanced weapons in known space, energy, shields that could stop anything, and plasma cannons that could slice through asteroids. But the Vorthic were different from any enemy they had ever faced. Their ships were alive, growing and changing after every battle. When the Coalition forces hit them with energy weapons, the biomechanical hulls would adapt and become stronger. When they destroyed a Vorthic vessel, the enemy would salvage the wreckage and use it to build new ships that were even more dangerous. "Sir, we have another report from the Kepler sector," said Commander Veltar, his voice heavy with defeat. "The entire Third Fleet has been destroyed." Admiral Zexton managed to send a final message before his flagship was consumed. Kethfer closed his eyes and tried to push away the image of brave crews being devoured by living ships. The Vorthic did not just destroy their enemies. They absorbed them, taking their technology and knowledge to make themselves stronger. Every victory the swarm achieved made them more powerful for the next battle. "How many ships did we lose?" Kethfer asked, though he already knew the answer would be terrible. "All of them, sir. 230 vessels, including 5 battlecruisers and the carrier Bright Star. The Vorthic fleet that attacked them has grown to nearly 400 ships. The numbers were getting worse with each report. The Coalition had started the war with over 3,000 ships spread across 50 different fleets. Now they had less than 800 vessels left, and most of those were damaged or running low on supplies. "The Council is meeting in 1 hour," Veltar continued. "They want to discuss retreat options. Some members are talking about abandoning the outer territories completely and focusing on defending the core worlds." Kethfer turned away from the display. The idea of giving up entire star systems filled him with rage. But what choice did they have? The Vorthic were not just winning the war. They were consuming everything in their path like a plague of metal and flesh. The emergency council session was held in the Great Chamber at the heart of Nexus Prime. Representatives from 27 different species sat around the circular table, their faces showing the same mixture of fear and desperation that Kethfer felt in his own heart. "We cannot continue this way," said Chancellor Mordak of the Rigel Commonwealth. "Our fleets are being destroyed faster than we can build new ships. At this rate, the Vorthic will reach the core worlds in less than 6 months. What about the new weapon systems?" asked General Hexara from the Vegan Military Republic. The plasma torpedoes were supposed to be more effective against biomechanical armor. "They worked for exactly 3 battles," Admiral Kethfer replied. Then the Vorthic adapted. Their ships now absorb plasma energy and use it to power their own weapons. We made them stronger. A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Every species in the Coalition had contributed their best technology and tactics to the war effort. Energy, weapons, particle beams, gravity bombs, quantum missiles. Nothing worked for more than a few engagements before the enemy found a way to counter it. "There might be one option we have not considered," said Ambassador Veltar quietly. "The humans." Several council members actually laughed at the suggestion. Humans were barely more advanced than the primitive species that had not yet achieved faster-than-light travel. They had only been in space for 50 years, and their technology was crude compared to galactic standards. "The humans still use kinetic weapons," scoffed Counselor Drexivon. "They fire metal projectiles at their enemies, like ancient warriors." throwing spears. What could they possibly do against the Vorthok? They are isolated in their single system, added Minister Kelphis. They have never fought a real space war. Their largest ships are smaller than our escort frigates. But Admiral, Kethver was thinking, the humans were different from every other species in the coalition. They had developed their technology independently, without contact with galactic civilization. Their weapons and tactics were completely unlike anything the Vorthok had encountered. How? Much do we know about human military capabilities? He asked. Very little, Veltar admitted. They have been building ships for the past 20 years, but we assumed they were just for system defense. Our intelligence suggests they have perhaps 50 vessels total. 50 ships against the Vorthok? General Hexara shook her head. That would be suicide. Maybe, Kethver said slowly. But the Vorthok have never faced kinetic weapons before. They adapt to energy attacks because they understand energy. But solid projectiles moving at high speed, that might be something completely different. The debate continued for 2 more hours. Most council members thought contacting the humans was a waste of time. But as reports came in of more defeats and more systems falling to the swarm, desperation began to override pride. Very well, Chancellor Mordock finally announced. We will send a message to the humans. But we should not expect much help from such a primitive species. The message was simple and direct. The galaxy was under attack by an enemy that consumed everything in its path. The coalition forces were losing the war and needed assistance from anyone willing to fight. Even if the humans could only provide a few dozen ships, every vessel would help. The response came back faster than anyone had expected. President John Carter's face appeared on the main display, his expression serious but determined. Behind him stood a woman in military uniform with stars on her collar. This is Admiral Lisa Rodriguez of the Earth Deep Space Fleet, the woman said. We have been monitoring the war against the Vorthok for the past year. We know what you are facing, and we are ready to help. The council members exchanged glances. The humans had been watching the war? How was that possible? We will send our available forces to the Kepler Station Rally Point, President Carter continued. Our fleet should arrive within 2 weeks. We understand this is a desperate situation, but we want you to know that Earth will not abandon the galaxy in its hour of need. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. The humans were actually coming to help. It was probably too little, too late, but at least someone was willing to stand against the swarm. Admiral Kethfor looked at the holographic display again. The red zones were still spreading, and the Vorthok were still winning. But for the first time in months, he felt a tiny spark of hope that maybe the humans would surprise them all. Captain Jake Sullivan stood on the bridge of his ship as the human fleet prepared to drop out of hyperspace. Around him, his crew worked quietly at their stations, checking weapon systems and running final diagnostics on their equipment. Moment they had all been training for was finally here. All ships report ready, Captain, said Lieutenant Danny Foster from the communications station. Admiral Rodriguez has given the order to proceed. Take us out of hyperspace, Sullivan ordered. Let's show these aliens what Earth can do. The stars shifted and twisted as the human fleet emerged from hyperspace near Kepler Station. Sullivan looked at his main display and smiled. 200 ships materialized in perfect formation, each one exactly where it was supposed to be. The aliens were about to get their first real look at human military power. Kepler Station. Admiral Kethver watched the arrival with growing amazement. He had expected to see maybe a dozen small human vessels, probably converted cargo ships with weapons bolted onto their hulls. Instead, he was looking at the largest fleet he had seen since the war began. How many ships are there? He asked his aide. Sensors count 200 vessels, sir, but that cannot be correct. Our intelligence said the humans only had 50 ships total. Run the scan again, Kethver ordered, but he could already see the truth with his own eyes. The humans had not sent a small support force. They had brought their entire fleet, and it was much larger than anyone had imagined. The human ships were unlike anything in the Galactic Fleet, where coalition vessels were. Sleek and curved, designed for speed and elegance, the human ships looked like flying fortresses. They were thick and angular, covered in armor plating and bristling with weapon turrets. Even the smallest human destroyer was larger than most alien cruisers. "Sir, the human flagship is requesting permission to dock," reported the stations. "Communications officer." "Granted," Kethver replied. "I want to meet these humans face to face." Admiral Lisa Rodriguez walked through the docking tube with confidence, her boots making sharp clicking sounds on the metal floor. She was followed by several other human officers, all wearing uniforms that looked practical rather than ceremonial. When she reached the station's main reception area, she offered her hand to Admiral Kethver in the human gesture of greeting. "Admiral Rodriguez, Earth Deep Space Fleet," she said simply. "Thank you for calling us." "Admiral Kethver, Galactic Defense Coalition," he replied, taking her hand and shaking it as he had learned from the cultural briefings. "I must admit, your fleet is much larger than we expected." Rodriguez smiled. "We have been preparing for this war longer than you know. We saw what the Vorthik did to the outer colonies 2 years ago. We knew they would not stop until they had consumed everything. But your technology," Kethver said carefully. "Our reports indicate that humans still use primitive kinetic weapons. How do you expect to fight an enemy that has defeated our most advanced energy systems?" "Let me show you," Rodriguez said. She activated a portable display unit and brought up technical specifications for human weapons. "We use what we call kinetic kill vehicles. Solid projectiles accelerated to 12% of light speed using magnetic rail systems." Kethver studied the display with growing interest. The human weapons were indeed primitive by galactic standards, but the velocity numbers were impressive. "These projectiles would have tremendous impact energy," he said. "Exactly. The Vorthik adapt to energy weapons by absorbing and redirecting the power. But they cannot adapt to a chunk of metal moving at 40,000 kilometers per second. Physics is physics, no matter how advanced your biology." Lieutenant Commander Amy Walsh, Rodriguez's tactical officer, joined the conversation. "We have also developed nuclear and antimatter warheads specifically designed to counter biomechanical armor. Our weapons are diverse and unpredictable, which should make adaptation much more difficult." "This is all theoretical," said General Hexara, who had arrived from the Coalition Command Center. "The Vorthik have proven they can counter any weapon system after a few battles." "Then let us prove it in combat," Rodriguez replied. "We have a scouting force 3 systems away. My intelligence suggests a small Vorthik patrol group is operating in that area, perfect for a field test." The joint task force assembled quickly. Captain Ben Parker led a squadron of human frigates alongside several Zentari cruisers. The mixed fleet jumped to the target system and began scanning for enemy contacts. "Contact," reported Parker's sensor officer. 5 Vorthik bioships, medium size, moving toward the inner planets. "This is Admiral Kethvar to all ships," came the voice over the communications system. "Coalition vessels will engage first using standard energy weapons. Human ships will observe and analyze enemy responses." The Zentari cruisers opened fire with their plasma cannons, sending bright beams of energy toward the Vorthik ships. The biomechanical vessels absorbed the impacts with their adaptive hulls, just as they had done in hundreds of previous battles. Within minutes, the enemy ships began returning fire with their own energy weapons. "Coalition ships are taking heavy damage," Parker reported. "Their weapons are having no effect." "Human ships, you are cleared to engage," Kethver ordered. "Show us what your kinetic weapons can do." "All frigates, prepare for railgun volley," Parker commanded. "Target the lead. Bioship, fire on my mark." The human ships turned toward their targets, presenting their forward weapon arrays. Along the sides of each frigate, magnetic railguns began charging with electrical energy. The alien observers watched as the human ships prepared to fire their primitive weapons. "Mark," Parker said quietly. The railguns fired simultaneously, launching solid projectiles at incredible velocity. The metal slugs crossed the space between the fleets in seconds, moving too fast for the Vorthic ships to dodge or deploy defensive measures. The impact was devastating. The first bioship simply exploded as the kinetic energy tore through its hull. The second ship was hit by multiple projectiles and broke apart in a shower of organic debris. The remaining 3 Vorthic vessels tried to adapt their hulls, but there was nothing to adapt to. The human weapons were not energy beams that could be absorbed or redirected. They were solid matter moving at tremendous speed. "All enemy contacts destroyed," Parker reported. "0 human casualties." The coalition ships hung in space, their crews staring at the wreckage of the Vorthic patrol. In less than 5 minutes, the humans had accomplished what galactic forces had been unable to do in 3 years of war. They had destroyed Vorthic ships without losing a single vessel. "Admiral Rodriguez," Kethve said over the communications channel, his voice filled with something that might have been hope. "I think we need to discuss new battle plans." Rodriguez looked at the tactical display, showing the destroyed enemy ships. "The real war is just beginning," she said. "But now we know we can hurt them." For the first time since the war started, the galaxy had a chance. News of the first human victory spread across the galaxy faster than hyperspace communications. On every coalition world, people who had given up hope began to believe that maybe they could win this war. The humans had done something that was supposed to be impossible. They had destroyed Vorthic ships without losing any of their own. Commander Rick Hayes led the human 5th Battle Group through the Outer Rim territories, hunting for Vorthic supply lines. His ships moved like ghosts through space, appearing suddenly to attack enemy convoys before disappearing back into hyperspace. The biomechanical ships that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 years now found themselves being hunted. "Target confirmed," reported Lieutenant Sandra Davis from the sensor station. "Vorthic supply convoy, 12 ships, heading toward the Rigel system." Hayes studied the tactical display. The enemy convoy was heavily defended, but it was also slow and predictable. The bioships were carrying raw materials and energy cells to support the main Vorthic fleet. Destroying this convoy would hurt the enemy's ability to build new ships. "All ships prepare for hit and run attack," Hayes ordered. "We go in fast, hit them hard, and get out before they can call for reinforcements." Human ships dropped out of hyperspace directly in front of the Vorthic convoy. The biomechanical vessels immediately began changing course, trying to protect their cargo ships while bringing their weapons to bear on the attackers. "Fire," Hayes commanded. The human ships unleashed everything they had. Railgun projectiles slammed into biomechanical hulls, while nuclear missiles exploded in brilliant flashes of light. The Vorthic convoy, designed to carry supplies rather than fight battles, was torn apart in minutes. "All targets destroyed," reported Captain Helen Murphy from the UES Defiance. "Enemy reinforcements are jumping in from the outer system." "Time to go," Hayes said. "All ships, jump to rally point 3. The human fleet vanished into hyperspace just as a larger Vorthic force arrived at the battle site. The enemy bioships found nothing but wreckage and radiation, their supplies destroyed and their convoy gone. This pattern repeated across dozens of star systems. Human forces would appear without warning, destroy their targets, and disappear before the Vorthik could respond. The enemy, used to fighting predictable battles against coalition forces, found themselves facing an opponent that refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare. Captain Helen Murphy became famous throughout the galaxy for her attack on the Proxima Beta colony. The Vorthik had conquered the world 6 months earlier, turning it into a processing center where they broke down captured technology and materials. The biomechanical factories on the planet's surface were producing new ships for the swarm. "This is not going to be easy," Murphy told her crew as the UE Satifians approached the planet. "The Vorthik have turned the entire colony into a fortress. But those people down there had been waiting for rescue for 6 months. We are not going to let them down." The human ship entered the system alone, but it carried enough firepower to destroy a small fleet. Murphy had loaded her torpedo tubes with different types of warheads, each one designed to counter a specific type of Vorthik. Defense. The biomechanical ships orbiting Proxima Beta moved to intercept the lone human vessel. They expected an easy victory against a single enemy ship. Instead, they flew directly into a carefully planned trap. Murphy fired her first torpedo spread, each missile carrying a different payload. Nuclear warheads exploded against biomechanical hulls while antimatter charges tore through adaptive armor. The Vorthik ships tried to adapt to one type of attack, only to be hit by something completely different. "All orbital defenses destroyed," reported Murphy's weapons officer. "The planet is clear for ground assault." But the real innovation came from Chief Engineer Steve Collins, who had been working on new ways to keep human ships fighting far from their home bases. While coalition forces needed specialized repair facilities and rare materials, human ships were designed to fix themselves using whatever materials they could find. "We can turn asteroids into ammunition," Collins explained to a group of amazed alien engineers. "Our ships carry fabrication units that can process raw metal into railgun projectiles. We can fight for months without returning to base." This capability allowed human forces to operate deep in enemy territory, striking at targets that coalition forces could never reach. They established hidden supply bases in empty star systems and converted captured enemy materials into weapons and fuel. Lieutenant Colonel Janet Foster made perhaps the most important discovery of all. The Vorthik operated as a collective intelligence, with all their ships connected through biological communication networks. This made them very efficient at sharing information and coordinating attacks, but it also made them vulnerable to confusion and misdirection. "We can jam their communications," Foster explained to Admiral Rodriguez. "But more importantly, we can feed them false information. Make them think our fleets are in one place when they are really somewhere else." The first test of human electronic warfare came during the Battle of Wolf, 359. The Vorthik had assembled a massive fleet to attack the system's industrial centers. Coalition intelligence suggested the enemy force contained over 200 bioships, far more than the human forces could handle in direct combat. Instead of fighting the enemy fleet, Foster's team began broadcasting false signals throughout the system. They made it appear that human ships were attacking from multiple directions at once, creating phantom fleets that existed only in the Vorthik communication network. The biomechanical ships scattered to respond to threats that did not exist, breaking up their formation and exposing themselves to attack. When the real human fleet finally struck, they found the enemy completely disorganized and unable to coordinate their defense. "Enemy fleet destroyed," reported Captain Greg Turner, who had led the actual attack. "Total human casualties, 0. The galactic media began calling it the human miracle. Systems that had been written off as lost were being liberated by human forces, using tactics that no one had ever seen before. The Vorthik, who had seemed unstoppable for 3 years, were now retreating from multiple fronts. Admiral Kethfer stood in the coalition war room, watching as red zones on the galactic map slowly turned green. For the first time since the war began, territory was being reclaimed from the enemy. How is this possible? Asked Chancellor Mordock, who had opposed contacting the humans from the beginning. They have been in space for only 50 years. How can they fight better than civilizations that have existed for thousands of years? Because they think differently, Kethra replied. We have spent so long fighting civilized wars with civilized weapons that we forgot how to be ruthless. The humans never learned to fight fair. They fight to win. The tide of war was turning, but everyone knew the real test was still ahead. The Vorthik were retreating toward their core systems, where their main fleets and production centers waited. The final battle would determine whether the galaxy would be saved or consumed. But for the first time in 3 years, the galaxy had hope. The humans had shown that the Vorthik could be beaten. Now they had to prove they could be destroyed completely. Admiral Lisa Rodriguez stood before the largest fleet assembly in galactic history. Ships from dozens of different species filled the space around Nexus Prime, but the formation was organized according to human tactical doctrine. The aliens had learned to trust human leadership after months of victories against the Vorthik. This is it, Rodriguez announced over the fleet communication system. We have pushed the Vorthik back to their core systems. Now we finish what they started 3 years ago. Today we take the fight to their home territory. Captain Greg Turner commanded the Spearhead Assault Force, heading toward the Epsilon cluster. Intelligence reports indicated the Vorthik had built massive hive complexes in this region, industrial centers that produced new bioships for their fleet. Destroying these facilities would cripple the enemy's ability to replace their losses. All ships drop out of hyperspace in attack formation. Turner ordered, remember, we hit them fast and hard. No mercy, no quarter. The combined fleet materialized in the Epsilon system to find it heavily defended. Thousands of biomechanical ships orbited the industrial worlds, their living hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. The Vorthik had been preparing for this. Attack. Enemy fleet composition is larger than expected, reported Lieutenant Amy Walsh from the tactical station. We count over 3,000 hostiles. Then we better make our shots count, Turner replied. All ships prepare for maximum firepower engagement. The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships unleashed devastating barrages of kinetic projectiles, while alien vessels provided support with their energy weapons. The Vorthik bioships fought desperately, knowing that defeat here would mean the end of their expansion. Commander Julie Adams deployed the newest human superweapon during the battle. The Hammer of Terra was an antimatter charge delivered by a specially designed penetrator missile. Unlike conventional antimatter weapons, these charges were designed to completely disintegrate their targets, preventing the Vorthik from salvaging any wreckage. Hammer of Terra armed and ready, Adams reported from her position aboard the UES Thunderbolt. Target locked on the primary hive complex. Fire, Turner commanded. The antimatter missile streaked across space, its warhead containing enough destructive power to level a small moon. When it struck the biomechanical hive complex, the explosion was visible from orbit. The entire structure simply vanished in a flash of pure energy, taking with it the production capacity for hundreds of enemy ships. But the real shock came when Colonel Tony Baker's Marine forces landed on the remaining hive worlds, most galactic. Civilizations conducted warfare primarily in space, considering ground combat to be primitive and unnecessary. The Vorthik had built their planetary defenses, assuming that any attackers would remain in orbit. Landing zone secured, Baker reported, as his troops established a beachhead on Epsilon 4, beginning assault on Hive Complex 7. The human Marines moved through the biomechanical corridors with weapons that seemed almost primitive compared to galactic technology. Chemical explosives, projectile weapons, and flamethrowers had been dismissed by most alien forces as outdated tools of warfare. But against biomechanical defenders designed to counter advanced energy weapons, these crude devices proved devastatingly effective. "Flamethrower teams, advance," ordered Major Kelly Brooks as her unit breached the central hive chamber. "Burn everything. Do not let any of the biomass survive." The psychological impact was enormous. Coalition forces that had been demoralized by years of defeat watched human soldiers storm enemy strongholds with weapons their own ancestors might have used. Yet these primitive tools accomplished what the most advanced military technology had failed to achieve. The Vorthic biomechanical defenders, evolved to absorb and counter energy attacks, had no defense against fire and high explosives. Their adaptive armor could not evolve fast enough to protect against weapons that simply burned or shattered their molecular structure. Major Brooks led the most daring assault of the campaign, attacking the orbital platforms around Vorthic Prime itself. Her fighter squadrons used small, fast ships carrying massive payloads, a tactic that no other species had developed because it seemed too dangerous and inefficient. "All fighters, follow my lead," Brooks commanded as her squadron dove toward the enemy platforms. "We go in fast and low. Hit your targets and get out." The human fighters moved with the agility that alien pilots could not match. They had been trained in atmospheric flight conditions that no other species experienced, learning to maneuver in gravity wells and thick air. This training translated into superior performance in the vacuum of space that the orbital platforms, designed to defend against large capital ships, could not track the small human fighters as they weaved between the defensive fire. One by one, the massive biomechanical structures exploded under the impact of human weapons. "All primary targets destroyed," Brooks reported. "Vorthic orbital defenses are offline." The victory at Epsilon Cluster sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. The Vorthic, facing extinction for the first time in their expansion, began a desperate retreat toward their final stronghold. But Admiral Rodriguez had no intention of letting them escape. "We have them on the run," she told the assembled fleet commanders. "But this war is not over until the last Vorthic ship is destroyed. Intelligence has located their central nexus, the Queen ship that coordinates their entire swarm." Captain Chris Morgan, newly promoted to lead the final assault fleet, studied the tactical data. The central nexus was located in the heart of Vorthac space, protected by the largest concentration of enemy forces ever assembled. It would be most dangerous mission of the war. The central nexus is a biomechanical construct the size of a small moon, Morgan explained to his senior officers. "It houses the collective intelligence that controls the entire Vorthic swarm. Destroy it, and the enemy fleet will become disorganized and vulnerable." Commander Sandra Davis, who had become the coalition's expert on multi-layered attack coordination, began planning the assault. The mission would require every type of warfare the humans had developed: direct assault, electronic warfare, psychological manipulation, and ground combat. "We will hit them with everything we have," Davis said. "The Vorthic will throw everything at us to protect their Queen ship. This will be the biggest battle in galactic history." As the fleet prepared for the final assault, soldiers and crew, members throughout the galaxy, knew they were making history. The humans who had been dismissed as primitive just months ago were now leading the greatest military operation ever attempted. Admiral Rodriguez looked out at the assembled fleet and felt a mixture of pride and determination. Humanity had come so far from the isolated species that had barely achieved faster-than-light travel. Now they were the galaxy's greatest military power, leading a coalition of advanced civilizations against an enemy that threatened all life. "All ships, prepare for hyperspace jump," she ordered. "We are going to end this war." The fleet vanished into hyperspace, carrying with it the hopes and fears of billions of beings across the galaxy. The final battle was about to begin. The final battle began in the Vorthak home system, where their central nexus hung in space like a dark moon made of metal and flesh. Captain Chris Morgan led the largest assault fleet in galactic history toward the biomechanical construct that controlled the entire enemy swarm. All ships, battle stations, Morgan announced over the fleet communications. This is what we have been fighting for. Today, we finish the Vorthak forever. The central nexus was protected by every remaining bioship in the enemy fleet. Thousands of vessels formed defensive rings around their queenship, ready to die protecting the collective intelligence that guided their species. The sight was both terrifying and magnificent. Enemy fleet composition is massive, reported Lieutenant Danny Foster from the sensor station. We count over 5,000 hostiles, including ships we have never seen before. Then we better make this count, Morgan replied. Commander Davis, begin the attack. Sandra Davis coordinated the most complex military operation in galactic history. Human electronic warfare specialists began broadcasting signals designed to disrupt the Vorthak collective consciousness, while kinetic weapons platforms prepared their heaviest bombardments. Nuclear and antimatter missiles armed themselves in their launch tubes. The battle started when the first human railgun salvos reached the enemy defensive line. Solid projectiles moving at incredible speeds smashed through biomechanical hulls, but the Vorthak had learned from their defeats. These ships had been specially adapted with thicker armor and redundant systems. First wave of attacks is having limited effect, reported Captain Jake Sullivan from his position commanding the main gun line. The enemy has adapted their defenses. Then we adapt too, Morgan said. All ships switched to Pattern 7 attack formation. The human fleet began using tactics they had never tried before. Ships would fire their weapons and then immediately change position, making it impossible for the biomechanical vessels to predict where the next attack would come from. The aliens in the coalition fleet watched in amazement as human commanders improvised new strategies in the middle of the battle. But the Vorthak were fighting for their survival. Biomechanical viruses began attacking human computer systems, trying to corrupt their navigation and weapons control. Acid clouds erupted from enemy ships, seeking to dissolve human armor plating. Most terrifying of all, the central nexus itself began projecting psychic attacks that targeted the minds of human crew members. We are taking heavy casualties, reported Captain Helen Murphy from the UES Defiance. The enemy is using weapons we have never encountered before. Hold the line, Morgan ordered. We cannot let them break through. The battle raged for hours, with both sides taking terrible losses. Human ships exploded under biomechanical fire, while Vorthak vessels were torn apart by kinetic weapons. The space around the central nexus became a graveyard of twisted metal and organic debris. Then Captain Lucy Adams made a decision that changed everything. Her ship, the Hughes Valiant, had been badly damaged by enemy fire. Her weapons were offline, and her engines were failing. But she still had one option left. This is Adams to all ships, she announced over the emergency channel. I am going to ram the central nexus. Prepare boarding parties for direct assault. Negative, Adams, Morgan replied. Your ship is too damaged. You will not survive the approach. Maybe not, Adams said, but I can get close enough to put Marines inside that thing. Someone has to destroy the Queen Mind from the inside. Adams pushed her damaged ship toward the central nexus, using the last of her engine power to dodge enemy fire. Biomechanical weapons tore chunks from her hull, but she kept flying. When the Valiant finally struck the surface of the enemy construct, the impact created a breach large enough for assault teams to enter. Boarding parties away, Adams reported just before her ship's power finally failed. Good luck, Marines. Colonel Tony Baker led the assault team through the biomechanical corridors of the central nexus. The interior was like nothing they had ever seen, a mixture of living tissue and mechanical systems that pulsed with alien intelligence. The air was thick with spores that tried to infect their sealed combat suits. "Keep moving," Baker ordered his troops. "We need to reach the central chamber before the enemy can organize a defense." The human Marines fought their way through corridors filled with biomechanical defenders. Their flamethrowers and explosives cleared a path through enemies that had been designed to counter energy weapons. When acid sprayed from the walls, they used chemical neutralizers. When psychic attacks tried to confuse them, they relied on their training and determination. "Central chamber located," reported Major Kelly Brooks. "The Queen Mind is directly ahead." The final chamber contained the collective intelligence that controlled the entire Vorthic swarm. It was a massive brain-like structure connected to thousands of communication nodes that reached throughout the galaxy. Destroying it would cut the connection between all Vorthic ships. "Plant the charges," Baker ordered. "We have 10 minutes before this place comes apart." The human explosives were simple chemical devices, but they were more than enough to destroy the biomechanical brain. As the charges detonated, the psychic screams of the dying Queen Mind echoed through the minds of every Vorthic in the galaxy dot outside the central nexus. The effect was immediate. The coordinated Vorthic fleet suddenly became confused and disorganized. Bioships began firing at each other, or simply stopped moving altogether. Without their collective intelligence to guide them, they were helpless. All ships pressed the attack. Admiral Rodriguez ordered from her flagship, "Do not let any of them escape." The battle became a massacre as human and coalition forces destroyed the leaderless Vorthic fleet. Within hours, the last major enemy, concentration, was eliminated. The war that had threatened to consume the galaxy was finally over. President John Carter addressed the Galactic Council from Earth, his image broadcast to every world in coalition space. Behind him stood Admiral Rodriguez, now wearing the insignia of Supreme Commander of the reformed Galactic Defense Force. "The Vorthic threat has been eliminated," Carter announced. "But this victory belongs to all of us. Humans, Centauri, Aquilians, and dozens of other species fought together to save our galaxy." A celebration lasted for weeks on every coalition world, but the humans were already looking toward the future. Earth had gone from an isolated colony to the galaxy's premier military power, and with that power came responsibility. "We will share our technology and tactics with all coalition members," Rodriguez told the assembled alien commanders. "But in return, we must all commit to mutual defense. We cannot allow another threat like the Vorthic to arise." Captain Jake Sullivan was appointed to command the new integrated fleet training program, teaching alien officers how to use human tactics and weapons. The old assumptions about technological superiority had been shattered forever. The story ended with massive, joint shipyards being built throughout the galaxy. Human and alien engineers worked together to design new vessels that combined the best of both technologies. The galaxy had learned that sometimes what appears primitive might actually be exactly what you need. Humanity had answered the call when the galaxy was losing, and now they were making sure it would never face such a threat again.